Okay, sorry about that, guys. I went live without turning my microphone on. So I do apologise for that. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Um, Now I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about that. And tonight I'm joined by, and welcome to Mimirs Council Live, obviously. Um, it's good to have you here, everybody that's listening. And sorry about not turning my mic on there. But tonight I'm joined by Rhys, Steed, and Eadric again to kind of continue our discussion that we had last week on the COVID-19 situation, or its unfurling, as it is. This kind of surreal world we're living in, where we're still all under some kind of house arrest for something that's not really materialising. Tonight, we're going to be tying up a few loose ends here and there that we didn't get to cover with last week's show because it was a little bit. We tried to give it a bit more of a format, so this might be a bit more of a looser format tonight, but just to have a reasonable conversation about it, try and discuss some of the new things that are happening, like the BAME workers and the what is it they called, the Control of Disease Act 1984. Talk about that a little bit, the new normal, and a few other topics as well that we're going to get into. But the first thing I want to mention before I introduce my guests here tonight is our latest video. We did do a video on the week 14 and week 15 stats in the UK called COVID-19 UK death spike, consequence of lockdown. There we have a look at these numbers, similar to as we did in our first video, but that was a little bit more of a high production. This was just to get some information out because I saw a lot of people trying to reply to that video by linking these stats, saying, well, how do we explain all these numbers then, right? This death spike. So in that video, we go into it a little bit and try to explain that the numbers are not all as they seem. And we also bring up in that video the idea that the lockdown could be causing as many, if not more, deaths than the virus itself, or the supposed virus deaths, because as we explain in those videos, where they say COVID deaths, across all media and government, where they say COVID deaths, they actually mean wherever COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate, not that it caused the death. And then we look into some of the other things that people are dying of whilst having COVID-19 and how the negative effects of the lockdown could encourage illnesses like that. So as I obviously had my say in the video a little bit, I just want to bring everybody in and hope you're all doing good tonight, guys. Everyone okay? Remember to... Well, yeah, good to have you guys. And you, Rhys? So, any of you guys want to add anything on that last video we made? Just any pointers that we didn't get to cover in the video, maybe, or anything any of your own personal insights?
Some of the stuff that's in that video, we did actually discuss to some extent in the documentary that you put out about a week before, before going into a little bit more detail on things in that video. There's not much that I've got to say. Things have changed. Things have changed quite a bit since then. They've started. First of all, they said it was plateauing and all that with the debts, and we've sort of flattened the curve and all that, and it's we've reached the peak and whatever else, and now suddenly the figures go back up again. With the way in which they've included debts from non-NHS buildings, they've started to change the way in which they've recorded the debts that have occurred so far, and they've done that retroactively as well. So we've now seen a new spike that isn't exactly a spike; it's the inclusion of previous debts. But beyond that, I've not really got much to say there. I feel like what you've talked about in that video, you did so very comprehensively. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they've started to record these other deaths now, but we use, and just to make this clear with all of our videos, we use the ONS statistics. That's the Office of National Statistics numbers. And they are always going to be higher than the ones that were being presented in the media. So there is no, from our standpoint and what we've presented, there is no increase. And this goes And this is through all of our videos, and that's the reason we use the Office of National Statistics numbers, because they are the most up to date, because they use death certificate information. But like I say, in that, we've got care homes, we've got all these things, and there's horrible stories coming out about these types of things where people are not allowed to see their families on their deathbeds in these care homes, which just shows you the extreme measures, how these extreme measures, are being implemented. People are not being able to see their loved ones for weeks on end. And in fact, whilst in the UK now we've had an extension of 3 weeks to our lockdown. We're in the first week of that, or the second week. I've lost track of time with a bit of cabin fever. But many old people are already under 3 months of lockdown, because vulnerable people are being told to stay in much longer anyway. This was before the extension. And certain areas in the country are also getting warnings to stay in longer. And just interesting note there that 3 months is kind of like the most deadly period when somebody gets forced isolation, or abrupt isolation, that is, where they lose a loved one, they retire and no longer communicate with their friends that they would have normally, or for other reasons, accident, injury, and they're locked up and they're stuck in bed, or they're less mobile and can't get out to see their friends. Those first 3 months after something like that happens are the most deadly for people that are suffering anything. And these can be perfectly healthy people, and we all know this anyway. When somebody loses a loved one, or maybe they retire, we can all see that it has negative effects, especially on the old and especially on the ill. So when you add the ill and the old together, which, as we present in these videos, most of these people have 3 or more illnesses, and the vast majority of these people are over 80, so that are dying, that have got COVID written on their death certificates. I mean, there's lots more there too. There's a lot of speculation about people putting COVID-19 on the death certificates as a means to gain financial incentives, especially in the US. I'm not sure about the situation with that in the UK, but also people. Oh, sorry, who's that?
It's me. I was going to say.
Eadric.
Yeah, I actually looked into that a little bit today, and I had the exact same problem. I was trying, because there's been some reason to believe that there's been an incentive in the UK as well to put coronavirus or COVID-19 on death certificates, whether or not. Yeah. Now, when I was looking into it, I couldn't find any substantial evidence of that. However, it does appear, monetary incentives and things like that appear to be the case. However, that they are encouraging people, when a death is unknown, to put that COVID or potential COVID on the death certificate, instead of doing a post-mortem, in order to reduce the burden on the NHS and things like that. But
yes,
this is to some extent speculative, because when I was looking into it today, I just couldn't find anything to really substantiate that.
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing they did do with the COVID, when they introduced the COVID, it was the Coronavirus Act. What was it called now? I forgot what it was. It was some kind of parliamentary act that they brought in to give themselves new powers for 2 years.
It's called the Coronavirus Bill.
The Coronavirus Bill. Yeah. Well, that was 2-year bill. And one thing they did do in that was for coroner's reports, instead of having to have 2 signatures, you have 1. And this was across the board for mental health assignments. So to be, what's it called when you get stuck stuck in a mental home, they only need 1 signature now, not 2. But sections, yeah. And also across the legal system, they did this as well. And somebody in the chat there says that their mother-in-law's sister and husband dies in the last 2 weeks, and they can't organise a funeral. And this is the kind of thing we're happening. But obviously, that's after the fact, and it's terribly sad. But I mean, the fact that people can't see their dying loved ones. I mean, and somebody dying somebody that's very ill, say, and maybe not dying, but it could take a turn for the worse. A lot of the statistics that I try to bring up at the end of that video, and a lot of the studies that I read, were showing if somebody's ill and you just abruptly end their social world, they have a much less chance of getting better. And in fact, it increases across the board illness. and it actually even increases your antiviral.
Yeah, so someone I was a stream I was listening to earlier today. Actually, I can't remember who it was, but the guy made a very good point that as you get older, you start to think about your death. You start to think about your mortality and your final days and things like that. But what gives you consolation is the idea that you will die by the ones you love, by your legacy, by your children, your grandchildren, maybe even your great grandchildren. And that gives a lot. I'm sure that gives a lot of elderly people solace as they get older. And the idea of heading towards those kind of final years and months of life, and not knowing that the ones you love are going to be able to be with you final times. That's something probably remove that kind of will and purpose and that kind of spark of energy that elderly people hold on to.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And like I say, there are, and I covered them a little bit in that video. I wish I could have gone into more, but I didn't want to make it another epic video and very long. But all the studies I said, I mean, just take a few quotes from that video. That a massive meter study that was done, and this was done from information from studies done from 1980 to 2014. They concluded that isolation and loneliness, perceived or real, was as deadly or as big a threat as obesity, which, according to the NHS, is the second biggest killer in the UK. And like I say, other studies showed that it increased inflammation, plaque in the arteries, cancer cells, increased growth. And I read a lot of studies on this and went through a lot of it. And it was, when I read that, I started to realize that what we're seeing now with these increased deaths could be direct result of the lockdown and not a virus. And I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the virus here. We could talk a little bit about the quarantine, in fact, because as most people know, you quarantine ill people, people that have the virus. In this case, we're quarantining everybody. Yet we're not really quarantining them at the same time. I can go to the supermarket, for example, where possibly hundreds, if not thousands of people have been before me that day with the same workers interacting with those people that are going to be interacting with myself. Now, if it's so deadly, if it's so virile and it's going to kill everybody, then having people all congregate to get out of the house, even maybe to just go to the shops, so they can get out of the house an extra time, having them all congregate in an area where the same staff, and why are we not seeing masses of dead shop staff, right? Where are they coming from? I mean, they're working there day in, day out, and that's where most people are getting their contact with the outside world. So it's not really a quarantine.
On top of that as well, you've got, going back sort of a few weeks ago, they were saying, well, longer than a few weeks ago, a few months ago, in fact, when this thing was kicking off in China and it hadn't really reached the West yet, they were saying, it'll live on surfaces for as long as a week. And then it came over here and they were saying, actually, it doesn't do that. It doesn't even stay on surfaces whatsoever. I remember there was an article from Germany about a study that they carried out in some North German town where they determined that there's no evidence at all that it lives on surfaces and things like that. But then it goes back on that, and now they're saying it lives on surfaces for 3 days or whatever else. Bottom line appears to be that they don't really know. Nobody really knows. But when it comes to going to the shop and doing your shopping and things like that, never mind interacting with people, if it does live on surfaces, which coronaviruses do, the flu does and things like that, if it does live on surfaces, then you're not only interacting with people and going to the shop, but you're picking things up that, countless people have been touching all the time. So when it comes to what this quarantine or so-called quarantine or whatever it is, people, you're interacting with objects on which this virus could live for potentially extended periods of time. We don't really know whether it does or not at all. it just makes it look as though the entire situation is less about actually quarantining people and more about social control.
Oh,
I think they were
100%.
saying it stays on plastics the longest or something. There's two doctors that were talking about it recently in a video that got taken down. They were saying plastics, so in the shop, it could just be any sort of product that someone's picked up and just stay on there for like a few days.
But yeah, that's the point. The quarantine is even if we actually had a virus that was killing people en masse, the quarantine that we're using at the moment is completely useless. Is the point? It wouldn't be effective, and this actually ties into some of the stuff that we want to cover in a future documentary about the digital authoritarianism, because I don't know if you've noticed, but you can look this up, and this has been going on for a while, that money carries the most bacteria and carries it the longest. Interestingly, I don't know why that is. I haven't seemed to discern what about money makes it carry viruses longer, but that seems to be the consensus on that. But that's just an interesting...
There are plastics in modern notes, so that could be maybe the
There
reason.
are, yeah. But you can wash them at the same time, I believe. Can you wash the notes now in the UK? Because they're plastic, right?
They're waterproof here. In America, you can't, though, can you? They're paper. It's paper money, though.
They were paper when I lived there. I don't know about now.
But it's interesting. Notes in the UK changed recently, didn't they? A couple of years ago, there was a big uproar about them because they're all plastic, whereas they were kind of essentially before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's difficult not to speculate as to whether there was some poor planning.
Well, yeah, I mean, they definitely want to get from this anyway. I would say and speculate that getting rid of money is certainly something here. But before we will go into that a little bit, we can touch on the digital authoritarianism a little bit towards the end, because there are always new revelations coming with that. Like, for instance, Rhys could probably tell us a little bit about the app has been released in Australia. But like I say, we'll get that into a bit, because there are some stories that have been very hot topics at the moment, such as the BAME health workers. Now, BAME, for those that don't know, means Black, Asian, Minority Ethnicity group. So these BAME workers, that is what we term in the Western countries as minorities, but generally have far more bigger populations than that of England, such as India, that has 1 billion people, yet they're ethnicity, they're minorities in England for some reason, or classed as minorities. But there's been the news that they're being removed from the front line. There was news a little bit earlier in the week that they were going to get first dibs on the PPE, the personal protective equipment. Now, one thing I want to bring up, just kick this conversation off about that, is the fact that if we actually look at the map and the spread of COVID-19, India, for example, is right next to China. India has a population, as I just mentioned, of 1 billion. They're not well known for their hygiene. Streets are used, and I've never been to India, but I've had family members that have and told me that, doing a number 2 in the middle of the street is not uncommon there. So they're not the most hygienic. Yet those people in their own countries are suffering lots less than us, if we are to believe the numbers, right? If we're to believe the numbers, the UK is one of the highest now, with such a small population. Yet places like India are fine. Yeah, carry on. Sorry, Eadric.
I was just going to say, I think the UK is actually rapidly catching up with Italy, is probably going to overtake Italy in the next few days or weeks, potentially, in terms of the official figures, death toll. Whether or not we can put any credence on those figures is a different story. I think it's worth pointing out, when it comes to a place like India, I'm not a virologist or a pathologist. I don't know the science, but as far as I understand sort of the immune system and things like that, if you take a number 2 in the street and lots of people around you are taking number 2s in the street, you've probably got a better immune system than people who are locking themselves up at home and working in offices and being very cleanly all the time and things like that. So when it comes to India and countries like that, it's really hard to understand exactly how to frame the statistics that we're receiving. The main thing I would keep in mind, though, is that quite suspiciously, it does appear to be all Western European nations and nations such as America, where we're seeing lots and lots of deaths and all that.
That is a good point, actually, because we are more isolated from germs and stuff. So if we visit those countries, we tend to get stomach bugs and things like that much more easier.
Yeah, but even so, right? Like say, Africa's hardly got any problem, and we're looking at medical care as well here, right? So we're supposed to be first world nations that have way more sophisticated medical care. Yet we're suffering the worst, whereas third world countries that literally, in some places barely have hospitals, seem to be doing okay. And people might be saying, well, they're not recording the numbers, but at the same time, we're not seeing any death spikes anywhere in these places. But in the UK, where they're going to take these minority workers off the front line, because they're being affected worse than others, then so with that we're seeing these health workers being removed, because they're being affected worse. Yet it's not playing out in the rest of the world at all like this. In fact, it's majority white European descent nations that are suffering from this, not any minority nations. Except for China, but I like to say, and I'll re-emphasize this: they're not minority nations. They're only minorities when they get here. They're majority nations like China and India. So, have you got anything to say on that, Steed?
Yeah, some of the people, some of the listeners might be aware of the alternate theories, the theories that challenge the germ theory as to what a virus actually is, and I'm not gonna kind of pin my hat to one thing or another here, but just briefly, the alternate theory is that a virus is actually a response to toxins in the body, and if we were to consider that for a moment, then what we could say is that BAME, Black, Asian, minority ethnic people, for a start, they're racially not predisposed to northern. Their bodies demand more sunlight, more vitamin D. So if vitamin D plays a role in aiding the body to rid itself of toxins, that could be a factor here. That's speculation there, but there are all kinds of things. There are all kinds of reasons, and let's not forget, when the media says that BAME people are suffering most from this, they're not really presenting any reasoning, any scientific data to say why that is. Or in fact, they're admitting that they don't know exactly why that is. So we're taking that at face value, and I would warn against taking that, trusting too much in that.
No, I agree completely. I did do a little bit of reading on it the other day to try and, same as you, I was trying to find out, well, why are they dying? What is it? And there was no answer, really. There was just a lot of speculation. They try to bring up poverty, the same old stuff they beat us over the head with all the time. Yes, Steve, sorry.
Yeah. Well, when I heard about this, my first response was, well, to me, it seems quite obvious. We supposedly passed the peak of this crisis now. First wave is now called. So in order to justify prolonging the lockdown, which is really what the powers that want to do, in order to justify that, they needed to find a way to cause more strain on NHS. And one way of doing that is to thin it, to remove certain people from it, and by being able to place the victimhood narrative upon minority within the NHS, they're able to both stretch it thinner so that they can justify the lockdown further, and also propagate this victimhood narrative that minorities have, that
Mhm.
everything is worse for them. That there is this kind of white privilege isn't just something that is it is a deliberate act on the part of white people, but it's now something almost kind of metaphysical now, almost like, you know, nature itself is racist.
Yeah. But I mean, it's funny here as well. With things like this, always make me laugh because they suddenly understand representative statistics. So they'll say they only make 14% of the population, but they're dying at 70% of the rate. Well, they don't ever do that when they tell us about crime, for example. They never bring up those types of statistics then, or the fact that. Yeah, I forgot the exact statistic now, though. But although they only make up a small percentage of NHS workers, they're responsible for something like 60 or 70% of all misconduct cases.
It's approximately 20%, I think, just under 20% of NHS workers are non-white, or in fact, it's not even non-white; it's non-native. So, you know, including people who are, you know, from Poland or wherever else, people who aren't, you know, who don't originate from the United Kingdom. I think it's just short of 20% of the NHS.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain I looked at some statistics. I should have got them all, but about 70% of misconduct, medical misconduct, professional misconduct cases are brought against ethnic minorities within the NHS, but they never tell us that, right? So I always find it interesting how they only use these representative statistics when it favours them.
I think it's worth pointing out as well regarding all of that kind of stuff that when they talk about things like poverty and poverty being a contributor to the likelihood of you catching, you know, a dangerous infection or whatever, there's a lot of native people in this country who are living in poverty. I'm from, you know, I come from Liverpool, and that city, there's a lot of poor white people, and there's a lot of poor white people, native white people in, you know, most cities up and down this country actually, and it's quite ignorant. Willfully ignorant to deny that or to ignore that.
I agree. But this is something that we get with these champagne socialists that want to find their victim or their proletariat to rage against the machine, and they've picked the. It doesn't quite work on the, you know, the ethnically English. The ethnically English working classes are generally very nationalistic, so it doesn't quite work on them. To rally against the machine, as it were, so they get their, for want of a better word, pets, and that's how they see them, to fight against the machine for them while they sip their champagne. We see this with climate change as well, where they fly around the world telling us that we should stop using certain products and stop doing certain things, and then always blaming us for all the problems and all the ills in the world, all the problems caused by big capitalist, globalist, internationalist corporations running around the world, destroying third world nations, then blaming the common average Englishman or Frenchman or German or American who is in poverty himself. But this is something that, this is something we've discussed at Mimirs Council a little bit. And after we come out of this coronavirus surreal situation, we hope to discuss a lot more the working class man and the common Englishman and his position in many things.
Yeah, it's not like the average American or the average European native, you know, white person who is who's doing those things that you describe, you know, going around the world testing vaccines in Africa, for example, and things like that. It's a clique of a small clique of elite, rich, powerful people, and they certainly don't represent the average working native European.
Yeah. I think it's. Sorry, go on, Phil.
No, I was just going to introduce you because I knew you wanted to speak before, so you carry on, mate.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning as well that certain nationalist voices are using this as an opportunity to highlight the flaws in the argument, the kind of racial argument of the mainstream narrative, and it's good that they're doing that. And there's namely two myths which are being destroyed with this. One is that race is just skin deep. Obviously, if that were true, then a minority staff wouldn't be suffering more. Secondly, it's that our NHS couldn't survive without immigrant workers, which again, well, they're now proposing that the NHS not only survives but thrives during a time of supposed crisis without immigrant workers. So it destroys that myth as well.
Yes.
And that it is good for us to do that, and I'm glad that people are doing that. But I think we need to be cautious there because, again, and I made this point in the last stream that we had. You can have an incredibly rational, logical argument like that, and you can think that that is going to somehow undermine the entire establishment narrative on everything. But ultimately, it's who holds the whip hand. It's who is in control of the narrative. And we can point it out on Twitter or YouTube or in person, whatever platforms we've got. But the mainstream news, the BBC, are not going to mention those things, not going to mention how these two myths are being destroyed by this idea of removing BAME staff from the NHS. What they're going to do is use it as another opportunity to point out that they're victims and that everything is stacked against them, and we need to look after them more than we look after anyone else. Some people are more equal than others, kind of thing. So again, it's another kind of lesson in what really matters is who is in power, and this whole thing, this whole coronavirus supposed crisis, it's all about answering control current establishment has.
Just repeat that last sentence a little bit because you broke up towards the end there, mate.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. This whole thing, this whole coronavirus supposed pandemic, all about enhancing the control that the establishment has. So,
yeah. Power, power ultimately dictates what's going on, and they have the power, and they have mass media. I mean, and this is something else to look at from this perspective, and this is what's shocked me with some of the, especially nationalist circles, that have decided to be pro the lockdown, and I've seen a lot of them justifying it and also, and we talked a little bit about this last time, but we know from being a majority in our countries, but treated like a second-class citizen in many cases, as in jobs, etc., and just in the way we're treated, just like these BAME workers. If this was a real virus, what we're doing is putting our people at the front and not treat. There's no sort of equality there that they preach to us of equality. They're saying, no, these people are going to be took out of harm's way and we're going to leave people in, if it were a real virus. So we're seeing this kind of oh, my thought's gone there, sorry. I've just lost my thought. Does anybody know where I was going with that? Because I don't. But it happens sometimes. But
yeah,
not sure, mate.
No, and Rhys, do you want to add anything? Because you haven't added much yet.
Say, like, what do they say is the reason for the native English for not enough working in the NHS, that we need to replace them with immigrants? Obviously, it's probably the failure of the education system and whatnot, and also people just don't want to work for a corrupt medical
I don't
industry.
even know what they mean when they say that, because I mean, yeah, you can go to some towns like Birmingham, for example, or somewhere like that, where you're probably going to see the vast majority of people who work for the NHS there are, an ethnic minority group. But you go to somewhere like, well, plenty of towns, there's plenty of places up and down this country where the vast majority of people there are natives. Again, the actual, as far as I'm aware, I would need to check, but as far as I'm aware, based on what I looked at most recently, the statistics for people, for natives working in the NHS is upwards of 80%. It's the vast majority of people.
Yeah, oh, sorry, and I've just remembered my point, so jump in there. But my point was that I was going to make before was about how, as nationalists, we see how government and media work in unison to pump the same point. Because as Steed was saying there about the power of the narrative, and the power to implement the narrative. The whole idea of democracy in this kind of environment is a sham, because if the media shapes public opinion, and public opinion then votes for who's in power, and the people in power and the people in media are the same people, then you get a vicious circle, as it were. So anybody that's supporting this from the standpoint that it's positive for us anti-globalists or anti-anything. The very fact that the media are gaining this, as Steed pointed out a minute ago, that they're using this just to push the victimhood, and even though we have valid points on our side that we can counter them with, they're not going to get promoted. It's just going to be more of this victimhood. We can't get that message out, and they can. And the power of the media cannot be underestimated in this discussion at all, because and the fact that it acts in perfect unison with government nearly all the time, even when it's pretending to act against it. It's almost like a reverse psychology. But are we ready to tie up that BAME subject a little bit now, or does anybody else want anything to add to it before we?
Yeah, hopefully I'm coming. I know I was breaking up a little bit when I was last speaking. Hopefully I'm coming through okay now.
Yeah, you sound better now.
Yeah, good. No, I've got nothing else to say on that. I mean, we could go down all kinds of windy avenues with this, but the time being, until more information and more develops with this, I think that's probably all we can really say.
Yeah, so we'll move on to the next subject as well here, because this has got a little bit of news this week, the Control of Disease Act 1984. Now, I haven't looked into this that much. I've been pretty busy this week, to be honest, so I'm kind of relying on my co-host here to help me out a little bit. But I know you, Steed, you did have a good look at this video that was released by, I forgot his name, was it Phoenix? Something, Zach Phoenix?
Yeah, he's a guy called Zed Phoenix.
Zed Phoenix, yeah.
Yeah, he's he used to go by the name Ben Fellows, and he was I don't know the entire story with that, but some people think he's not entirely credible because of it. He accused I can't remember which politician.
Yeah, he's like a half-caste guy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he accused someone of I think of trying to of being inappropriate with him or molestation, something like that when he was younger. He became a name because of that, and then I think it came out.
Yeah, I remember now. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it came out later that perhaps his story wasn't entirely credible, but I don't know enough about that to speak on it. But he made a video quite recently, which got quite a lot of traction, where he read out or picked out the highlights from what he believed was an updated control of disease. What he said that it had been updated on the 27th of April, obviously insinuating that this was specifically to prepare for what's coming, in probably phase 2, this COVID-19 crisis. But actually, it turns out, and a lot of people pointed this out, if you go to government, if you go to the page, at the top of the page, you'll see that the date there is always today's date. So it's just the website itself is always verifying itself as being currently up to date. So it could well be. I mean, it's the 1984 Act, so it was introduced in 1984. So obviously that's a long time ago. And I think it's probably just being kind of generally kept updated. But anyway, what Zed was saying was that the Act allows for forced vaccinations, for authorities to fine people who refuse large amounts of money, and to also detain them, not to even let the family know where they've detained them to. I had a look at it because I'm someone who strongly opposes vaccination. Now, I've seen someone in the chat tonight saying that they've gone from being anti-vax to being pro-vax. And, this isn't an issue about whether you're anti-vaccination or pro-vaccination. It's about whether you have a say over what happens to your body or not. That's the issue. And that's something I feel quite strongly about. And I think all four of us probably do feel that way about it. So I had a look at this because I was quite. It's quite a frightening prospect, really, when when you're opposed to that what you believe to be tyranny, then you find out that actually the government has given itself the legislation to be able to forcibly vaccinate you or take you away from your home, to fine you large amounts of money for refusing to do this or refusing health authorities to vaccinate your family, then that's quite a frightening prospect. So I had a look at the Act myself, and I do think, and I, hopefully this will be a little bit of a white pill for people. I do think that Z may be misleading people a little bit with this, because the only mention of the word vaccination in the entire Act is where it says, under the title medical treatment, it says medical treatment includes vaccination, other prophylactic treatment. And just before that, it says regulations under Section 45B or 45C may not include provision requiring a person to undergo medical treatment. So, I mean, it's difficult without being well versed in legalese and knowing how these acts are worded very well. But my understanding, what that suggests is that they, according to this act, they can do a lot of things in the event of a pandemic, but the one thing they may not be able to do is to forcibly vaccinate. They may not be able to provide medical treatment, which includes vaccination or prophylactic treatment. Also, so I'll just finish this point quickly and let other people give their take on it. With regards to the large fine, Zed was saying that the fine was £5,000 and then a certain amount per day that this was going. But when you look at that section, it actually says 2% of 5,000 or level 4 on the standard scale. Now, I don't know what level 4 on the standard scale actually refers to, what it means, but just on the face of it, what it's saying is the fine would be 2% of £5,000, which is obviously a lot less than £5,000. So I do think we've got a lot to worry about, and I do think that they're going to try to vaccinate people in a way where people consent to it because it makes life easier. I have to watch out for that, but I'm not entirely sure that this actually mandates.
Yeah, I think Zed has done some good content on this kind of subject recently, and when he talked about what was it? He done a video before that one about funding. It was funding, wasn't it?
He was talking about all of the individuals, organisations that Bill Gates funded in the UK.
Yeah, and that stuff was good. That specific video that you were talking about just now about Disease Control Act of 1984, or what I'm not certain what it's called exactly. There's some, I think you mentioned this a few days ago, Steed, that it may well have been the case before what's currently going on, and it gives that implication that they can force medication upon people, even before this kind of situation came about. And then on top of that, well, even if they can't mandate vaccinations, for example, there's some reason to be concerned about the fact that they could mandate tests, and they're sort of rolling out this whole idea that the military are going to be running, pop-up testing stalls, I guess, on the roadsides. They want to have like 96 of them or something like that up and down the country by the middle of May, I think it was, and things like that. All of that side of things is quite concerning, but it could well be the case that, not only would they not be able to mandate vaccinations, but that the amendments he was describing were actually in place prior to all of this kick off.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting points there, but as Steed mentioned, just to bring it back a little bit first, Steed mentioned there that the wording is may not. Now, may not can mean two things as far as I'm concerned. You may not do something, meaning you cannot do it, or I may not do it, meaning I might do it, or I might not do it. Now, I think that's, but like Steed rightfully pointed out, not being fully versed in legalese leaves us a little bit of a disadvantage with that kind of document. But what I would say as well, because I can see some chat about this in the comments now, I am anti-vax, but this is not an anti-vax or pro-vax situation. Forced medication of any type, and I've said this before, but I will say it again because it's very important. Forced medication of any type is a dangerous and slippery road. As soon as you say that everybody must have something, you open the doors to, well, anything. Say they decide to say that you're mentally ill, right? They only need one signature now. You've got some weird views over there, some white nationalists, some radical views. And I remember only a few years ago, actually, they talked about using magnets on people's brains would make them less. I'm trying to think how to put it, but basically less racist and more inclusive, etc. But and that study in of itself only showed that the normal behaviour is to be favouring in groups. If you've got to use magnets on someone's brain to make them accept the world that you want to give them. But the point here with the vaccinations is as soon as they start allowing that forced medication is okay, then they could say your opinions on this subject, whatever it may be, are not in line with everybody else's. Therefore, we declare you mad because we only need one signature, and then we're going to forcibly use some kind of medication to correct your thoughts. So I think we've got to be wary of anything this government does, and anybody that accuses people like me of being a libertarian or something for being anti big government in this sense. I just want to say that, you know, our governments have proven themselves hostile to us completely. We can see this daily, especially people that are probably listening to this show have seen how our governments have been hostile in many ways, and giving more power to a hostile force is never a good thing. So, and I think it is important that we move away from just the anti-pro-vax and say it is a pro-medical choice argument. I really do think that's important.
I mean, you know, sorry to be a bit crass about this, but is it liberal to defend against rape? You know, I mean, you've got, you know, if we're talking about state power and you know, might is right and this kind of thing, then, well, you know, the rapist is stronger. So, you know, therefore the rape, you know, the targeted rape victim should give in to him. You know, it's a load of rubbish. It's to be a liberal is not to just hand yourself over to any form of tyranny or oppression that's kind of...
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to hand out, like I say, they're hostile governments. I'm not going to give them anything. If I can help it, I don't want to give any, you know, if somebody wanted to hurt me, I'm not going to give them a hammer, you know, to do it more effectively.
No, exactly.
Regardless of if I think violence is okay, right? I believe that violence is necessary in the world, and sometimes violence happens, right? You can get attacked or put your life in danger, and you need to act violently to stop that. But just because I'm pro-violence, I don't want to give the guy that wants to hurt me a hammer. I mean, it's just backward thinking. But I mean, the times. Carry on, Steed. Sorry, if you want to.
I was just going to add to what you were
Adrian.
saying. Yeah, I was just going to say, add on to what you were saying then, with regards to violence sometimes being necessary and things like that. And also, you know, on top of that, I always got on libertarianism. It seems to be a bit of a confusion that some people are, some kind of confusion that some people are having, where they seem to think that any kind of criticism of the state is automatically a libertarian perspective or something like that. And it's like, well, like you say, for a start, if something is hostile towards you, you don't want to hand them a hammer. It's people arguing in favor of a strong state and things like that. And it's like, but if the state is your enemy, do you want to do that? It's also negating any kind of revolutionary action and things like that. Sometimes when there's a really bad negative thing going on in politics and whatever else, you need to, you know, act, wipe the slate clean and say, this is how we're doing it, you know, and whatever else. You can't just say, oh yeah, I like a strong state. Next thing you're going to have Brave New World and things like that. It's silly.
Yeah, I find the whole argument kind of bizarre, to be honest. I mean, and the usage of terms such as I've seen people using and accusing people like that are promoting ideas like us with our videos that we've made, that we're conspiracy theorists. Well, they are too if they're in the pro-white or pro-ethnic groups, or are concerned about the ethnic majorities in their country, such as the English in England, etc. Because mainstream media, if you talk about displacement theory, will call you a conspiracy theorist. Even though we can see it, even though we are getting the English in England are getting less and less each year. And people are using statistics, by the way, just at the moment, just to point this out, of like the percentages of minorities in this country are still using the last census data, which is I believe, from 2011, I believe. So we're almost up on the next census, so that data is way out of date. But so using terms like conspiracy theorists only feeds them. I don't think we're already accused of being conspiracy theorists. Trying to remove yourself from that label is not going to work at the moment. I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
Well, I think you either trust someone or you don't trust them. You can't half trust someone, because if someone is capable of telling you one or two lies, then they're capable of telling you an endless number of lies. So this mentality, to me, it doesn't make any sense to me, because why would you look at a hostile government as we have in the West and say, okay, well, they're lying to us about this and this, but they probably couldn't lie to us about everything. To me, that's nonsensical. If they can lie to you about immigration, social cohesion, and multiculturalism, and LGBT and all of that kind of stuff, they can lie to you about absolutely anything, even something as big as this.
Exactly, and you end up also doing a pick and choose, and this is something I hate across the board. When people decide to pick and choose what they believe and what they don't believe. And whenever you're presenting a case or presenting an argument, with our videos, for instance, I use all of their statistics. I don't use controversial statistics. I set my parameters as their statistics and work from there. I don't mix and match ideas. I don't go, well, let's look at this and look at this and look at this. I use what they're using, and that gives a consistent message. And as somebody mentioned in the chat as well, and something that should be, conspiracy does not mean false. Conspiracy actually means to conspire together, to breathe together, actually, to conspire. But many conspiracy theories have been proven truth. A conspiracy theory is a theory based that you believe that people are conspiring against you. Well, we have a famous one that we celebrate every year called Guy Fawkes Night, where we believe that there was a conspiracy to blow up Parliament. Yeah? Conspiracy does not mean fake, although they might do memes with tinfoil hats, etc. But to try and make us look stupid. Yes, carry on, Steed.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at what's going on now with the lockdown around the world, and 3 billion people or whatever it is who are essentially under house arrest. A year ago, if you had told most people, if you'd said to them, look, in a year's time, we're all going to be confined to our homes. We're only going to be allowed out to buy essential food. We're going to be allowed to do 1 hour of exercise a day. We're not going to be able to see our family. We're going to have to stay 2 meters apart from everyone else. We're going to be looking at potential tracking apps, all this contact tracing. There's going to be propositions about forced vaccinations and all of these kind of things. If you'd said that to people a year ago, they would have laughed at you as a conspiracy.
Yes,
and look
indeed.
where we are now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that leads us into the next subject a little bit, actually. And the title of this video, which we've been trying to get to, but we've had a lot to discuss, so it's taken us a while to get here. But the new normal. And this covers a few things. We can talk about a little bit about the digital authoritarianism, the tracking apps, as we mentioned a little bit, and also the phrases that they're using. The invisible enemy, social distancing, all these things that they're bringing about. So, I've spoken a lot. So, does anybody want to jump in there with anything? Just to, I mean, it's a bit of a loose term. Like I say, you could take it any way you want. So, anybody want to go off that?
Yeah, I mean, I can.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Rhys, have you got anything to add to that before I go?
I was just going to say, with this new tracking app that they've released in Australia, it's not even very effective. Like, for it to work on an iPhone or whatever, you have to kind of have it open and the screen on, it seems. So you kind of have to, like, if you lock your phone and put that in your pocket, it kind of stops it from talking to all the devices around it or whatever. So it seems more of like some sort of test to see how many people will actually download that and sort of consent to giving that information out,
Yeah,
rather
I
than
mean,
actually tracking us.
yeah, I mean, kind of like the quarantine. But I mean, we discussed this a little bit the other day or earlier, I think, Rhys, where like the quarantine is ineffective, and a tracking app that doesn't have everybody involved is kind of useless too. Because if the one person that hasn't got the app suddenly goes to your area, nobody's going to know that they've been in contact with the person with the virus, so everybody's spreading it around. It becomes kind of semi-ineffective, but most of what they're putting forward isn't effective for a virus because we're not seeing a virus anyway. I mean, there's a meme going around, if you hadn't put the TV on, would you know there's a virus at all? And the answer is no, to be honest. You just look at... In fact, no at all, except for certain shops are shut, and I'd wonder why. But other than that, I wouldn't see it in the people. So a lot of what they're bringing forward as being effective doesn't have to be effective because there's nothing to be effective against. And just to speak to those apps again a little bit, a lot of these apps came out of the South Korean app. The South Korean app, and they're ahead on smart city tech, big data, and I saw someone mentioning that in the chat in relation to 5G, and I agree with them. 5G is essential for smart city, and tracing apps essential to effectively work because it's about collecting more data. But like I say, as we see, they don't really. These points don't really. These apps don't really have to work at all because there's nothing really to work. It's more about getting people used to these ideas. And sorry, anyway, Steed, because I know you wanted to mention something earlier, so I'll let you go, mate.
I was just going to drop in and say, yeah, because quite simply, it's not about the virus. I know that seems like quite an obvious point to make to everyone listening, probably, but they don't have to. Yeah, as you said, they don't have to worry about the effectiveness of because they're not designed to combat genuine pandemic. Because, as far as I'm concerned, this isn't a genuine pandemic.
No.
So it's purely about this strive towards digital authoritarianism, which we're going to be doing a lot of work towards because this is really the big fight of our lifetimes, I believe, and that's what all of this is geared towards. All of it, and some good folks on YouTube and BitChute, and they've done some great compilation videos where they've gathered together footage of all of these mainstream media talking heads in America and the English-speaking world, all talking about the new normal. All of them. I'm talking to people like Bill Gates and all of these kind of obvious figureheads. They're all talking about the new normal. They're all talking about the continuance of social distancing. There is no way that we are going back to the life that we knew just a couple of months ago. They are absolutely intent upon leading us into a completely new way of life here, regardless of how much apparent impact this virus has. It's irrelevant. They're hell-bent on leading us into a new world where we are either going to be tracked or social distancing is going to become our normal reality, or there's going to be mass testing, mass vaccinations, or all of the above. It's that's where we're heading.
Yeah, there's a lot. I forgot to finish my point there, but with South Korea, where they're getting this idea for the app from, the point I wanted to make, which I forgot about for a second, was that South Korea was put forward as one of the success stories of the coronavirus because of how this tracking app works so perfectly. Well, the tracking app only isolated people that came in contact with other people that got COVID-19, and that was seen as a success. Well, in the West, in England, for example, everybody was put into lockdown. So how can putting everybody into lockdown be less effective than just putting those with the virus into lockdown? Surely it would be more effective because you take no chances with what the UK did, right? In that sense, yeah. If there was a real virus, the UK took no chances. Whereas South Korea allowed people to go around as long as they didn't come into contact with anybody that had later been shown to have COVID-19. So even their data was nonsense on it. So you can't have like, we're just going to quarantine some and quarantine all. Quarantine all will always be more effective, or should be more effective, because you take no chance. So it's kind of, it's all backward reasoning anyway, and that just goes to that. But I agree with you on the point you made there, Steed, that they're going to change it. Now, some people, I do want to point out here that part of changing people's behaviours is not instant. It doesn't mean that they just, 1 minute you're allowed to go everywhere, the next minute you're not allowed to go anywhere. I've talked about this a little bit with nudge theory and shaping social norms. They do it over a period of time, and what they're doing at the moment is changing people's opinions. People are now going to be more open to the idea of carrying apps for all sorts of reasons, run by government and big business. People are going to be more tolerant of maybe a future lockdown. Yes, they maybe go, okay, we've done it before, we understand it. And that's the point of types of things like nudge theory and social engineering. It's not to just change it overnight. It's to bring about a situation where you think differently. So when confronted with a problem, you react differently to that problem. And then that's kind of the slowly catchy monkey type tactic, right? So what they've done here has already been a success from their perspective, because people's opinions have already been changed on many things.
Yeah, whilst we're on this subject, and whether or not apps work and things like that, and these tracking apps, whether or not they're functionally effective, it is worth pointing out, exactly like Steed was saying a moment ago, and like you've just reiterated then, Phil, that it is about a process of normalization. First of all, one of the apps, I think it was Rhys was saying, the app that they introduced in Australia, it only actually works if you've got your phone like open, and it's actually active in the background and things like that. That's never going to work on a sort of general basis, unless you're walking around with your phone in your hand and you've got it unlocked and things like that, which obviously most people.
I think they're quickly trying to get us used to that, and until Google and Apple bring out their API or whatever to allow that more so.
Right, exactly. So there's this thing going back to sort of May of last year. A bunch of American sort of people working with the Trump administration done a paper on how to keep up with Chinese technology and things like that, because the Chinese introduced in this year, at the beginning of 2020, they introduced the final stages of the rollout of their social credit system and things like that. And whilst trying to keep up with this, they've said, and they're right as well, that the Chinese are in a lot of ways more receptive to tracking technologies and things like that, and more invasions, let's say, of your privacy by big corporations and things like that than we are in the West. And going back maybe 20 years now, here in the West, we've had, well, for as long as mobile phones and laptops and computers and things like that have been in use, we've been getting tracked and monitored by these corporations, but it's been behind the scenes and sort of below the belt. And when they try and bring it to the more sort of surface level and people are aware of it, everybody is like, no, I don't like that, I don't want to be tracked, even though it's happening. And I think part of the introduction of these tracking apps and things like that is to try and normalize Westerners to the fact that they're doing this. We've been aware of this for a long time, and the people have been, these companies have been tracking our data and using that data to build different programs, whether it comes to marketing and selling products and things like that, or actual government and policy making decisions. But it's been, again, behind the scenes, and whenever people talk about it publicly, everybody in the West is like, no, I don't like that, I don't like that idea. So I think part of introducing these apps is to get people, to normalize it and to make people more receptive to these kinds of things, because they're doing it, like Steed was saying, they're doing it and they're going to do it whether or not we like it. This is the new normal, as they keep saying.
Yeah, well, they do want to normalize the idea of our devices talking to one another as well and sharing information
Yes.
with everyone around us. So if they do introduce like a social credit system, it's already set up and people are, already used to this idea of having these devices running.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, the new normal is the normalcy. It's the nudge fear. It's pushing people to these ideas that it's okay. When I was actually researching, because the original video was going to be the whole lot, including the digital authoritarianism, but we're going to make that a separate one. I was shocked to find that many of the things that I was researching already existed. The government already has an app, and it's been going for a while now, that you can put all your information in, and every time you go to a government site, you don't have to put any details in because they're all there. You just have to have the sign in via the app. As I've said before, you've got Amazon Smart Shop type things where you don't have to do anything. You walk in, put the stuff in your basket. As long as you've got the app connected, you walk in, put the stuff in your basket and walk out. The money will automatically be taken off. And these things are all sold to us as convenience. And we can see why, right? I've had to use government sites and I have to put my data in endless times. And it kind of gets a little bit annoying. It can be annoying in a queue, and especially with things like coronavirus that we've got going around now and all the people that they're hyping up about that. They're going into these shops, they've got a queue with people, they could catch the virus, right? They've got to talk to a checker, like I was talking about at the beginning. Well, with this, you don't have to. You can walk in, walk out. You don't have to speak to or relate to anybody. So by pushing these ideas start to permeate in the mind as positive things, and that's all you've got to do. You've got to change the bias. So the bias. So instead of people going, "Oh, I'm a bit wary of that app because that app might track me," or "I'm wary of this no money technology because they could cut me off," to suddenly, "Oh no money would be good because then we'd have to interact with each other less. And that would make it better and safer, right?" So and this is across the board and everything. So you've just got to look at these little things that they're trying to change your opinion on, slowly. And they're always going to put up, because somebody mentioned in the chat there, sorry, that people were talking about, how there's a lot of information going on, and that's something we'll talk about in a bit. But I want to just make sure is anybody got anything else to say about the new normal? Because I know it's a vast topic. Like I say, we could go into it from smart cities, even into climate change. But carry on, Steed.
Yeah, if I could just drop in there, on the issue of the convenience of having your data more immediately to hand. A friend of mine who I believe is in the chat tonight, he mentioned that he's got a tracking, health app, and he had a closer look at it recently, and there was a message on there saying that it had already collaborated or combined with his health records. So I believe this app was already able to display his health record via the NHS, or he was actually able to allow it to do that already. And this is just another example of that this newfound convenience that having your own health records in the palm of your hand. A lot of people are going to see that as a really positive thing because well, why wouldn't you on the surface of it?
An easy sell for it is diabetes, right? Well, if you've got an app that communicates with other devices and you're diabetic, well, because one of the problems when someone's diabetic is, say they collapse or something, there's certain things, medications that they can't have, or you've got an allergy, say, right? Well, if your app instantly communicates to the NHS equipment that you've got the allergy, that's how they'll sell it. But then that would mean giving up, and that's exactly what we see in China, because with the Chinese apps now, like I said, they're not fully finished yet. But with the Chinese social credit system, it's much like our financial credit system, just with medical data, criminal history, with everything in it. It's not just financial. But every way they sell it is convenience. And this is something that really needs to be understood, because that's how they would get it. They will not sell it you as a jackboot about to stamp on your head. They're going to sell it to you as, wow, look, you can just make your life easier.
Yeah, and this is my major concern with all of this, because in our circles you can see a lot of people saying, I do not consent. I will not go along with this. I will not allow myself or my loved ones to be forcibly vaccinated. And, that's the right sentiment, of course. But the problem is when these people then find out that they may not be able to have their holiday in Spain next year unless they've had that vaccine, or they find out that they may have to be furloughed for longer from work until they've had that vaccine. This is where, it's not like there's an RV pulling up outside your front door, and then bashing your door in with a whatever they use to do that, and then dragging you out of your home and forcing a needle into your arm. It's all by consent. It's okay. Well, don't have the vaccination. But I'm afraid that means you're not going to be able to do this, this, and this. And if you want to continue to have the kind of carefree life that you had before, you're going to have to go along with it. So I do worry that a lot of the people that say that they don't consent might actually, when push comes to shove, when they're faced with the option of either being able to have some modicum of the life that they had before, or standing strong with their convictions and principles, it's easy to give in a situation like that.
And it also doesn't have to come through government. This is where corporations can have the power, because they may not employ you if you don't follow, if you don't have an app or you don't have this. They might choose that under their policies they're not. So therefore you can do it. And this is what the Chinese are doing. I mean, people don't understand this. How the Chinese are doing. It's not government locking you up if you be naughty and get a bad social credit score. It's business blacklisting you.
And a lot of people don't consider it tyranny. It's not being done by government.
No, because it's a corporation, and a corporation have the right to choose. Right, they can choose who to do business with. So
exactly. I mean, this is this libertarian mindset. Yeah. All this stuff going on with America, and they're talking about the affronts to the First Amendment and stuff like this. But it's private companies like Facebook and YouTube which are preventing your freedom of speech. Therefore, it's not applicable. But what these people don't realize is that these companies like Facebook and these big tech companies are working in conjunction with government. So it's actually irrelevant whether it's the corporation or the government doing it. It's tyranny either way.
They share their databases. We know here that the higher ups, the intelligence, they would have access to all these databases, and if they really want to track you, they really want to zone into your phone and find out what you're doing, collect all sorts of metadata on you. They can already do it, but now it's just about conditioning us to consenting to this, getting used to this, and also moving towards making it illegal if we don't carry our phones with us, because at the moment we can just turn them off or leave them at home, and there's no problem with that.
Yeah, they want us to accept it. They want us to what you've just described. They want us to accept that it's not only the government who've got access to this kind of information, but it's the government, it's the private sector, it's the public sector. It's big business. It's all of these things in this big mesh where they're all working together. And they want us to get comfortable with scanning our face on some scanner before we go into our apartment building or whatever.
Wasn't there a recent bit of news that we were sharing among one another today or yesterday, where someone or some kind of AI related company who were related to Google, guy has now been appointed to SAGE, the governmental advice.
Yeah, it was
board.
Google DeepMind. It was DeepMind.
Exactly that one.
I think I've still got that page open somewhere.
So the point is, as Rhys just pointed out, that government and big tech are already working hand in hand. I can't remember what the article is, but I was reading one the other day, which was giving examples of how the American police have already used the private data of big tech companies to carry out their procedures
multiple times. And the whole Google DeepMind thing, they've been working with the NHS for some time, and there was apparently a controversy, and I didn't know about this at the time. I would need to pull the article up as well to confirm exactly when it was, but it was in the last few years anyway. There's apparently a controversy where Google DeepMind illegally accessed the data, the medical data of 1.6 million UK citizens.
Yeah, I haven't read on that, but
I think Steed shared it earlier.
I think we've always, whenever you sign up for an app, we have one mobile phone in the house, And we don't sign up to any apps because when we read the actual terms and conditions to sign up to that app, we have to give them almost insane information. And I'd just like to quickly mention that we have a weirdo in the chat. And I know that he did a video recently that I haven't got around to watching, which I think is going to be talking a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in the future with Agenda 2030, etc. And I know he's up on that. And I'll tell you what, I'll do an extension here to the weirdo. That if he does want to come on and have a chat with me, I'd be more than happy to have him on. We could discuss some of this stuff. But that's up to the weirdo himself. I'll speak to him later. Sorry for that. He's a friend of mine and he is called Weirdo, so don't worry about it. Carry on, sorry. I just jumped in there. You were
I'll just say really quickly, actually, I pulled up that article. It was on CNBC. The UK government invited Google DeepMind exec to critical coronavirus SAGE discussions or whatever. I'm just reading off the thumbnail there, so I've not got the full thing open, but it was apparently 2017. So the UK's data watchdog ruled that DeepMind unlawfully accessed 1.6 million NHS patient records. And they say that the way in which the article describes this information as though it's surprising. It's as though you wouldn't expect it, or I wouldn't have thought that could happen. But as we've been saying for the last maybe 10 minutes now, this is something that they've been doing for some time. And what we're seeing now in this whole coronavirus situation is the normalization of that and bringing it into the public eye and making the public accept that all these private companies and things like that are going to work in tandem with your government, and they're going to access your information. And your little, Alexa spies and all the rest of them are going to, be reporting back your heart rate and whatever else.
Oh, yeah, there's an app for everything. That's why, some people in the chat there were saying, so is it going to be apps as ID cards? And I think that's the soft approach, in my opinion. ID cards seem very formal. And in the UK, unlike in the US, which I believe I'm not sure. I'm under the impression when I was there, I was told that I always had to carry ID. Whether that's legal or not, I'm not 100% sure. But that's what you are told there. Whereas you don't have to in the UK. With so many people using mobile technology, I think the soft approach to ID is through mobile technology. That's not to say that they wouldn't want an ID card or something as well. But I think it's a much easier approach because, like I say, I travel on the train a lot, and every time I get on there, I can't find anyone to speak to because everybody's looking at their phone. So everybody's already got one. Everybody's already engrossed in it. And as I said, they're already used to just checking that box of terms and conditions without reading any of them, what they're giving away. So it's not that I necessarily think that's the way they would want it, but I think it's just an easy way for them to do it.
Yeah. Sorry, if I could just go back to a point I made a minute ago where I said about police working in conjunction with big tech. I found the article which I was mentioning was in the Atlantic. If I could just read a section of it, a short section. It says, police used subpoenas to tap into huge warehouses of personal data collected by private companies. They have used these tools to gain access to doorbell cameras that now line city blocks, microphones in the Alexa devices in millions of homes, privately owned license plate readers that track every car, the data in DNA databases voluntarily pay to enter. So, obviously I can't verify that those claims are absolutely true, but it's in a fairly kind of authoritative publication. Talking about, the use of Alexa devices. I mean, personally, I think anyone who has an Alexa device in their house is insane. But it's also talking about doorbell cameras, the police being able to access those. And then we've got all of the stuff about, Ancestry.com and all of these kind of DNA websites potentially sharing the data that they've been sent with the authorities as well. We really need to stop thinking in terms of government and private companies being separate entities. They now work absolutely hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, we even see this with South Korea. I mean, South Korea, the whole reason it could develop its apps, and it's one of the top, and I keep going back to South Korea because it's one of the leading smart city users, and they're considered fairly, free, yeah? But they use this, and one of the ways they do it is complete integration between government and private business data. I mean, and this is how China are doing it too. Most of these app developments, because like I say, they are still in the process of whittling them down to which one they want to refine the process. They've got many of them going around, and nearly every one of them is being brought forward by big business, like Alibaba has one, and several other big, massive companies in China are running these. This is about mass sharing of data, and this is how smart cities work. This is how this digital authoritarianism work, because all data is essentially centralized, both private and public, and from this data, people can discern lots of things like with a score. This is why the Chinese use a credit score system, which is more like a best way to use a trust system. That then they can get it to be implemented. You can get things to be implemented just by adjusting that score that will shut them off from business all over the place. I mean, so yeah. I mean, I agree with you in short.
Yeah, well, there's data that people will willingly hand over to private companies, or what they think are private companies, that they would be horrified if the government asked them for.
But I mean, this is selling data. I mean, people that don't know this, just to quickly point out that selling data is $1 billion business right now. Billions of dollars in business go through selling data. That means anybody that you give your data to has the ability to sell that data on, and will. It is. In fact, many businesses, there's whole conferences you can go to at the moment about small businesses. Like, well, you might think that you sell, you might sell pots and pans, right? But actually, because you've got 100,000 customers, you've got a load of data, and that's got value too. So they're showing it as opening up more equity. Do you get me? Sell the data, man. You can make even more money than selling pots and pans.
While you're on the subject of data, I want to say there's a good quote about this. Chris Darby, the current CEO of the CIA's in QTech, and he's also on the board of the NSCIA, which is one of the advisory boards that are giving information to the Trump administration about how to get the economy up and running again and things like that in the US. In a CBS interview in 2019, he said this: data is the new oil, and China is just awash with data. And they don't have the same restraints that we do around collecting it and using it because of the privacy differences between our countries. This notion that they have the largest labeled data set in the world is going to be a huge strength for them. So, as you were saying, data is the new oil in lots of ways, especially as the economy is going more and more in this direction, this sort of digitized, online kind of direction.
Yeah, data's the big thing because, but like I say, on their end, it's all about information. It's all about targeting from, say, a small company. It's all about governments restraining, restricting, but in means that you accept. But on the front end, it's all shown as convenience, as we said. Convenience and free stuff and good stuff, and you can have this or do you want, and restrictions, etc. So on the front end, it's all about convenience, making your life easier. On the back end, it's all about control. And like I say, I've said this before and I'll say it again because this is going to have to cover a bit more at some point, is that I believe that this coronavirus, whatever it is, right, that's happened, leading us to this, is only teeing up the ball. When they start applying, now these new norms have been created and they start applying the climate change stuff, that's the club that's going to hit it out the park, because many of these cities that have been in lockdown have reported up to 50% reduction in emissions. When you start looking at some of the data on climate change goals, which are all around 2030, and you start seeing that they need to be reduced by 50% or more. So we're going to start seeing in the future people going, well, how do we reduce this? Well, lockdown give us an idea. How are we going to monitor people's? Most people have got smart meters now. How are you going to monitor people's energy usage? Smart meters, and the meter's smart. If you've got you end up with a 5G tower outside in your area, they'll be able to switch it off remotely because you've used too much energy. And I really believe that's going to be the bat that's going to hit the ball out the park. How they're exactly going to sell us that is going to be more of the Greta Thunberg stuff. Getting people demanding it, protesting. I saw some women protesting naked on Westminster Bridge just before the coronavirus outbreak. Somehow, that the government doesn't want to restrict our movement. I mean, this is where they got us. They got us demanding, well, not us, but these types of people demanding the government do what they want. The government wants to do. Kind of like basic reverse psychology. So let's take it a little bit off there, but just wanted to get that in.
I think that's a thread that goes through all of this, actually, because if we go back to the articles which are talking about these tracking, what you'll notice is that all of them say that they're going to need a certain percentage of users to have this app for it to be effective. It's usually around 60, something like that. And then all these articles end by saying that they don't know how they're going to get around this problem of perhaps not enough people installing or using these apps. But this is a real classic problem reaction solution, because they can pose this as a problem, and they've G'd the population up, the masses up, to be terrified of this thing and to want to get rid of it so they can get back to normal. So the public will react and say, well, this isn't good enough. You need to make this app mandatory. You need to make it so that everyone has to have it, so that we can get over this thing as quickly as possible. And then that's ultimately what the government and big tech wanted all along, was to force this on people. Yeah, go on, Eadric.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Steed. I was just going to say it's like a simple bait and switch strategy, and it's the same bait and switch strategy that they use over and over again, and they've been using it all the time. Whether it's going back sort of a month, 2 months ago, I don't even know how long it was ago. It could have been weeks and weeks ago now, for all I know. But going back some time ago, anyway, Donald Trump was saying, I want to get the economy up and running by like Easter and things like that. And then so-called medical professionals or not professionals, but medical authorities or whatever say, oh no, people are going to die if you do that. And then everyone goes, oh yeah, we need to be locked down in our homes and all the rest of it. And they've done the same here with Boris Johnson. They were like, I think that it was, they were saying, what was it? Herd immunity. They were saying we need to develop herd immunity. We need to let everybody in the UK get it. And then they're all going to develop herd immunity and we're going to be okay. And then so-called like health officials come out and say, yeah, but if you do that, thousands and hundreds of thousands are going to die. And then everyone goes, oh God, no, please, no, we don't want that. And we talked about this a little bit last time, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but they use the same bait and switch strategy every time. And it's all about setting up that, well, exactly what you were describing.
Yeah, it's about exactly as the first video that Mimirs Council produced, which we helped with. It's about manufacturing consent. That's what they've been engaged in since day one. Manufacturing. And they can't go in for this hard tyranny. They can't go for this forceful approach because they know how Europeans and Western people in general will react to that. So, but they've become experts manufacturing consent. That's exactly what they're doing.
Getting us to beg for it, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, and Weirdo there mentioned about airliners to go bust. Now, this is something interesting, just as a side note here, that people are saying that the people that were trying to argue that the coronavirus is good for nationalism because it is anti-globalist in nature, right? They're going to shut down the airports. Well, the immigrants are not coming in by airports. What they mean by shut down the airports, they mean shut down your freedom of travel, your ability to move around and come back home. Not immigrants that are moving in to countries. Immigrants are still coming in. We've all seen the funny articles that are coming out where you see them handing masks to people that are crossing the channel, which is becoming more common at the moment as well. I don't know if people have noticed that we're getting more people like Greece has been getting for a long time. People crossing the sea now. I don't know if you guys have noticed that we're getting more of these channel crossers and they're just handing them things. So it's all about our restriction and our restriction of movement, the free people, not about immigrants. They want those to flood in because that is the division that they need.
In some ways, this goes back to the whole BAME thing, the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic thing. They're saying the same thing there. It's like, it's not about our freedom. It's not about our anything. It's about they want us locked up at home, terrified. And same thing.
Yes, Steed, you wanted to say something, mate?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I've noticed that too. Yeah, I mean Nigel Farage has been making videos about migrant boats landing on the south coast
Yeah.
like this, which as far as I know he's not done before. So I believe that he is ultimately an establishment figure. So if he's been told to put his focus there, there's probably a good reason for it. I think, I mean, we could only speculate about whether the traffickers and the people who are involved in bringing illegal migrants over have been given a green light and told, look, do it now while, no one's paying attention. There's going to be no one out on the beaches. There's going to be no one patrolling the streets. You're going to have an easier time of it now. I was also going to say it ties into this whole idea of the fruit picking thing. People might have heard that they're flying in Romanians and Bulgarians and whatnot to pick our fruit for us, even though we've got millions of people unemployed at the moment. And it came out recently, I think it was Laura Towler that was saying that 30,000 British people have applied for these jobs and been rejected for them.
I think it was more like 50,000 in the end, I saw some of that data. About 50,000 applied and rejected because they didn't have the skills. And then they flew people in. They still... This is what I mean. Things are turning against us now. We see some of this as nationalists, but some nationalists are missing it. We're anti some of these people like Extinction Rebellion, but like somebody pointed out in the chat there, I think it was weirder that they're essentially a government agency playing the opposite card. So we get ourselves begging for this. Like I say, with those ladies on Westminster Bridge stripping down naked for some reason, which seems to be a popular choice now among these types of activists to strip naked. And Oak Ash and Fawn says that he would expect a vaccine to be linked to your passport. And I agree. It could be linked to lots of things. And not just vaccines. It could be lots of things that are linked to certain privileges. We're going to start earning our privileges, right? You have to earn the privilege. Yeah, carry on. Which one? Steed first.
Go ahead, Steed.
Just a quick point. Just to respond to what Okash and Thorne has said there. That's not conjecture at all, because the World Economic Forum or a company involved with the World Economic put out a video recently in the last few weeks since the lockdown, since the whole virus thing happened. They put out a video selling the idea of medical records and vaccination records tied to your passport. So, I mean, I think it's a pretty safe bet to assume that is going to become a reality.
Yeah, and there has been work done on this with homeless populations in America. I believe it was Texas, actually, where they were getting homeless populations and giving them an ID card and linking that ID to all their medical records. So that's the technology is there, and I think, as somebody mentioned in the chat earlier as well, like this idea of an RFID chip, an RFID chip, we've already got it. It's in our phones. We've been carrying around with us for ages. These ideas that they're going to inject it into your neck or any of that stuff it just makes us look more crazy. Yet it's already there, and this is how they do it, and this is how we've got to understand it. So sorry, Eadric, I know you wanted to say something there, mate.
Yeah, it was just on the same subject I was going to say, and we all know about this. All four of us are aware of this, and I would be very surprised if it was the case that many people in the chat weren't aware of this, because I think most people will be. But MasterCard made a tweet back in sort of late 2008 describing how they're partnering with Microsoft to develop a digital identity. And the way in which the tweets worded, I've just pulled it up now whilst you were talking: vote and drive and applying for a job, renting a home, getting married, boarding a plane. What do these all have in common? You need to prove your identity. In partnership with Microsoft, we're working to create universally recognized digital identity. And like you say, this isn't going to be something necessarily that they stick in your neck. It's probably going to be on your phone. And that's probably in some ways what this whole track and ID pushing thing is about. It's about normalizing that kind of thing. But like you say, it's many things. It's not just going to be, your passport or whatever. It's going to be, even applying for a job or for a flat or whatever. It's kind of like an all-encompassing,
Well, it's
almost
easy,
like...
huh? What, you never need to do resume or anything again. Just send your app to the company, and I'll sort it out from there, right? And your
Easy.
app will be
Don't
attached to other information, such as maybe a score or credit score, whether it be a financial one or a health one or whatever.
Just don't have to worry anymore. It's all easy, dead easy.
Oh yeah. So we've been going for a while now. So I think, and I do believe we wanted to end on a bit of a positive note. So if anybody's got anything else to say, I know Rhys, you haven't said much. If you want anything to add to what we've been discussing, go for it, mate.
Obviously, over the decades, I think by what the technology they're sort of patenting and all the research and stuff, they seem to eventually want all sorts of sensors on us so they can collect as much information on us and run all sorts of basically have us doing whatever they want us doing and have complete insight into what we're thinking, and what we're doing.
Oh yeah, definitely. So we'll move on to some more positive things. I don't know who wants to kick that off on how best we can use our time, maybe a little bit, and we'll just do a bit of 10 minutes on that. Have a little point each. What we can do with our time? Yeah, carry on, Eadric.
I don't know if it's a positive thing to say necessarily, but talking about using our time and things like that. One of the things I've noticed during this whole lockdown situation, house arrest kind of scenario, it's very, very difficult to maintain your motivation when it comes to physical and mental well-being, to be honest, whether it's reading, exercising, whatever else. For months before this whole situation, over a year, 2 years, I'd been training regularly, different things. And as soon as this whole thing kicks off, it's like your whole world has been sent into it's all different. You can't go to the gym and whatever else. So it becomes very difficult to maintain your well-being generally. So I think one of the things that we do need to keep in mind is that whether you're working from home or whatever else, or you can't go to the pub, which I'm sure is a shame, you've got a lot more time at home to try and think about that. And again, it's hard to maintain your motivation, but one of the things that I'm trying to do at the moment is keep up with my my home workouts and things like that, because I've really struggled in the last sort of month and a bit now to keep on top of myself, and I don't want to end up a little chubby boy. I want to make sure I'm doing okay, and it's hard work, but we've got time, and you need to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, maintaining health, especially if you watch our last video where talk about the negative effects of isolation on all members, actually. And in some studies I read, actually, that some of the health effects on particularly males, actually, but even on the younger generations was quite substantial. Although, like I said, I didn't go into it all in that video because it would have just made the video another very long video, and we didn't really have time to get that production in with everything else we want to do. Steed or Rhys, any of you got any more positive things we can be doing with our time at this time when we are stuck, some of us not able to work, or some of us carry on, Steed.
The first thing I would say is to anyone that's feeling depressed or pessimistic about this whole situation, always remind yourself there are an awful lot of people who think like we do, who are deeply concerned about this stuff. The Anglosphere, particularly, it has always been the kind of final hurdle for these globalist tyrants, because we've had this strong will towards justice and what's right and what's fair, and our values and like that. So there are a lot of us who are going to fight this. Obviously, people will drop out as it becomes less convenient to do so, but you're not alone. None of us are alone. There are hundreds of thousands of us across the English-speaking world and beyond who are really going to stand up against it. Other than that, as Eadric said, it's important to stay healthy and stuff like that. Particularly as I believe that formal healthcare, kind of conventional healthcare as we know it, is going to change. the future. I think we need to look at the kind of practicalities of the new world that we're emerging into, and each of us needs to be willing to adapt. And one of the things I would mention that looking after your own health rather than always trusting it in NHS or other healthcare professionals is going to become more important. So staying in shape, eating healthy, learning some basic kind of skills with regards to like first aid and taking care of it, and alternative, like not to sound all hippie and stuff like that, but alternative forms of healthcare, I think, is going to become important in the future, particularly for more dissident-minded people who may have a more difficult time accessing conventional medicine.
Yeah, I think that's always it. I mean, so any of the things that we can put forward at the moment are things that we should be trying to do anyway. And I mean, I understand that this is how they get us with convenience, that our lives are very hard. They're very difficult in some ways. And it's not that they're hard as in like our ancestors hard. They're hard in like just time. I know we homeschool, etc., and work from home, and finding time to do certain things can be very difficult sometimes in amongst it all. But some people have got a bit of extra time at the moment, and they should be using that. I mean, like I said this when I did a stream with Racial Consciousness, that, you know, gardening, it was the perfect time of year to do it. If you've got a garden and you never had a chance, get into it. There's so many resources. One of the benefits of the digital age is the amount of resources out there. You can look pretty much anything up on the internet and find out a million ways how to do it. So to use your time wisely, or as best you can under any circumstances, is always important. And we have time to educate ourselves on the situation at the moment. Some people, like I say, that are not at work maybe, or spending less time working for whatever reason, have the ability to learn and use this tool while we have it, because the internet's going to change too, and our access to it, that is for certain, and how we interact with it. So use what time you have with the things that you have before it gets worse, because we've got to try and stop this before it ultimately does get too bad, right? And we've got to really put some effort into that. So, Rhys, have you got anything to add on a bit of a more positive note? Although I'm not so sure mine was that positive.
I was just going to say, I think to keep a positive mindset, we have to set a strong belief that they aren't going to be able to pull this off. Because if we look at what they're planning, it's very easy to start thinking, well, this is what's going to eventuate. But, you know, we got to have a strong belief that they're not going to be able to fulfill this. And, you know, I wasn't going to go at this, you know.
Yeah, that we can fight back effectively. Believe that we can. I mean, the first step in anything is the belief that you can.
I think that's a really good point that Rhys makes there, actually, because those of us who are, you know, for want of a better word, kind of obsessed with this issue at the moment, and for good reason, can almost begin to mistake that focus that we've got for belief that it's inevitable. It's all inevitably going to happen because it's been so well planned out, and so many powerful figures and organizations and companies involved in it. And quite easily fall into that mindset that it is inevitable, but we need to remind ourselves it's not inevitable. So yeah, I think that's a good point that Rhys made there.
No, definitely. We have to believe.
And as they get closer to their end goal, it gets more riskier for them. More people are going to see through this all, and we're just going to be there to educate them, or like, you know, share what we know, what we've learned, you know, and just try and have trust in our people.
Yeah.
That's another good point. It's like, not only you know, is it not necessarily inevitable, and we can do what we can, but like you say, the more that they push and the further they get towards trying to reach what they want to achieve, the more people are going to get switched onto it, and the more agitated people are going to get. So if there's, you know, every cloud's got a silver lining kind of thing, if there's any, and it's probably that in a way. We can do what we can do for a start. It's not all bad. And then on top of that, the more they push and the harder they push, the more people are going to be switched onto it.
Indeed, I agree. Well, anyway, I'm going to call it a night for tonight 'cause it's getting a bit late, and I'm a bit tired tonight. So, and I'm sorry, I had a few technical problems at the start there, and I do apologise. Like I say, I'm a little bit tired tonight, but it's no excuse. I'll try and sort it out next time. Thanks for everyone that was involved in the conversation. Steed, Rhys and Eadric. As always, great to chat with you guys.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, great to talk with you.
Yeah, great convo. Nice to chat.
And we're
Thanks,
definitely,
everyone.
and we're definitely going to be doing a lot more on this. We've got a lot of ideas, too many ideas, to be honest, sometimes to get down on paper, then to get into video form. But we do have a lot of things to talk about and a lot of things we want to get through in a more condensed way, I suppose. And thank you guys for all listening. It's been really great to have you here. And obviously, us talking to each other, whilst it is interesting, it's made a lot better with you guys. So thanks again. And be well, and I'll catch you all next time. I'm not sure when that will be, but there will be one. All right. Be well for now, guys, and take care.